Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I don't even know where to start, but I have to get this out before it drives me completely insane. I've been a psychiatric nurse at a state facility in northern Michigan for 8 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. But last month shattered every rule I believed about reality. It began like any other Monday evening. I was back from a week off visiting my sister in Florida, feeling rested, my mind lighter than it had been in months. The facility, an aging brick building from the 1940s, loomed under the gray winter sky. Long hallways that echoed your every step, fluorescent lights that buzzed just enough to set your teeth on edge, and the familiar smell of disinfectant mixed with cafeteria food clinging to your scrubs. It all felt oddly comforting. I clocked in for the West Wing shift, responsible for our long-term patients, a routine I knew backward and forward. Medication rounds, check-ins, charting, and ensuring everyone was safe. It was mundane work, but steady. Then, around 8 p.m., Dr. Henley appeared at the nurses' station, exhaustion etched across his face, carrying a stack of manila folders. "I need you to review these assessments before the state inspection next week," he said, dropping them in front of me with a thud. I sighed. I'm meticulous about charting, so I wasn't worried. But when I opened the first folder, Ronald Vance, I froze. Pages of notes stared back at me in my handwriting, down to the tiniest quirks, the loops of my G's, the dots over my I's, the way I write the number 8, all unmistakably mine. Only these notes described things I had never witnessed. Ronald attacking another patient with a food tray, muttering about cameras embedded in his teeth, digging into his arm with a plastic spoon. The dates were during the week I had been in Florida. I stared, heart-hammering. My photos, time-stamped in Clearwater, proved I wasn't there, yet the notes claimed otherwise. I flipped the next folder. Catherine Moss, quiet, reserved, spending her days on crosswords. According to these documents, she'd been hoarding sharp objects, fashioning them into weapons. My shorthand was everywhere. PT underlined for patient, military hours, with dashes for medication times. Dr. Henley returned, puzzled. I explained, but he only showed me the electronic schedule, my name marked for every shift, with approvals, and my signature. "Maybe stress is playing tricks on your memory," he said cautiously, the way doctors talk to patients who seem fragile. A cold knot of dread settled in my chest. The next morning, I went straight to the security office, a cramped basement room that smelled like burnt coffee and old cigarettes. Paul, the night guard, pulled the footage. My breath caught. There I was, or someone who looked exactly like me, clocking in, grabbing coffee, walking with my exact gait, even favoring my left knee like I always do. I replayed it 3 times, zooming in. It was me, but it couldn't be me. I showed Paul the Florida photos. His shrug made my stomach twist. "Digital glitches happen," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. Then I asked for the medroom footage. My hands shook as I watched myself organize the cart. Controlled substances on the left, labels facing out, tapping each bottle twice. Every habitual movement was mirrored perfectly. Paul's discomfort grew by the second. I had to know. I spoke to Ronald directly. He recoiled at first, wide-eyed and tense. "You're the real one, right?" he whispered. "The other, she has your face, but her eyes, they're wrong." She asked about my dreams, wrote everything down. She gave me pills, white ones. They made my thoughts feel like they were being pulled out. I checked his chart. New medication orders, signed by Dr. Henley, based on my supposed reports. None of it was real. Catherine Moss was worse. She barely opened her door, sobbing when she saw me. The other one, she pretended to be you, but she smelled wrong, like copper and chemicals. She asked about my son, your son who died in Iraq. My blood ran cold. Catherine had a daughter, not a son, yet she insisted the other me told her the same story. By evening, I confronted Jennifer, the new nursing assistant. She dropped gloves, startled. Through shaking hands, she showed me messages, supposedly from me. Texts instructing her on how to observe patients without leaving records, referencing a study about memory elasticity. I snatched the phone. The language wasn't mine, too formal, clinical, but the number matched mine. She trembled. It's a program. You taught me. You said to observe their reactions. Keep it off records. I stared, numb. Someone had not just copied me. They had stepped into my life entirely. I didn't go home that night. I stayed in my car, watching the building. Around 8:15 p.m., the figure appeared. Me. Same scrubs, same gait. Tote bag with the coffee stain. They walked past the parking lot, got into a silver sedan, and drove to a glass office building on the other side of town. Government plates. Badge access. They vanished into the elevator. I waited until dawn, and they never returned. I drove home, hands white on the steering wheel, only to find a thick envelope waiting. No return address. My name typed neatly on a label. Inside were photographs of me in the facility that week I'd been in Florida, detailed behavioral notes, and a single typed page. Phase 1, Identity Integration Complete. Subject demonstrated 100% accuracy in behavioral replication. Patients showed expected stress responses to duplicity stimuli. Recommend progression to phase pending review. I went straight to the state board the next day, carrying every piece of evidence. Photos, security footage, patient testimonies. The investigator, Dolores Finch, listened, frowning more with each detail. She verified records, contacted the facility, but there was no record of my vacation. My sister's emergency contact number had been altered, redirecting to a message about research verification purposes. The board concluded I had suffered a dissociative episode under stress and recommended medical leave and psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Henley supported it, citing delusions. But the nightmare didn't end. As I left, I glanced at the nurse's station schedule for next month. My name, full shifts, approved. And in the margin, my handwriting, Phase 2 initiated. Weeks at home have been surreal. My neighbor saw me leaving for work yesterday wearing my scrubs at the exact time I sat in my kitchen staring at my revoked ID badge. I can't tell if I'm losing my mind or if someone has stolen my life entirely, right down to the way I walk, talk, and care for my patients. And the worst part, I have no idea what comes next. The morning I discovered someone was using my credentials to kill people began like any other Tuesday at the clinic. I had been practicing psychiatry for years in downtown Portland, mostly treating anxiety and depression at a medium-sized mental health facility serving hundreds of patients. My routine was predictable. Coffee while reviewing patient files, back-to-back appointments until lunch. I lived alone in a small, one-bedroom apartment a few minutes from work, spent weekends hiking when the weather allowed, and kept mostly to myself, except for the occasional dinner with colleagues. That particular October morning, the leaves were just starting to turn, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything seemed as I walked through the parking lot, completely unaware that my life and career was about to explode. The first sign of trouble came when Bethany, our head pharmacist, called my office around 9 a.m. She never called unless there was an issue with a prescription, usually just a dosage clarification or an insurance problem. But her voice had a strange edge, like she was trying to stay professional while clearly panicking. "Dr. Hawthorne," she said, using my full title, a rarity. "I need to verify this Helleridol order for Gregory Polson. The system shows you authorized 50 milligrams daily, but that seems unusually high." My coffee froze halfway to my lips. Gregory was my patient, yes, but I had him on 5 milligram, carefully monitored. 50 milligrams wasn't just high, it was potentially fatal for someone his age with his medical history. I told Bethany there must be a mistake, that I'd never authorize such a dose. But she insisted the order had gone through my secure login the previous night. Panic surged through me as I rushed down to the pharmacy, sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and wax. Bethany pulled up the order on her monitor. There it was, my electronic signature, my unique physician ID, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. But I had been home, in bed, watching some mindless reality show about house renovations, with my neighbor's dog barking incessantly. She showed me 3 more orders from the past week, all submitted late at night, all with doses that made no clinical sense. A 12-year-old girl prescribed 30 milligrams of Adderall daily when the therapeutic maximum was 10. An elderly man prescribed enough Xanax to sedate a horse. Every order looked legitimate in the system, traced back to my login, my digital fingerprint all over them. By noon, IT got involved. Jorge, a tech guy who always wore vintage band tees under his required polo, ran diagnostic after diagnostic while I canceled my afternoon appointments, trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare. He muttered about no breach detected and authenticated access points, jargon that basically meant whoever was doing this had my actual login credentials. I hadn't shared my password, logged in from unusual locations, or written it down anywhere. Yet the evidence was undeniable. System logs showed I had been logging in almost every night around midnight, systematically entering prescription orders for patients across our network, not just the ones I treated. Things went from bad to catastrophic that afternoon when Dr. Reeves, our chief medical officer, called me into his office. His space always felt freezing, AC cranked to Arctic levels even in October, pen clicking incessantly. "Judith," he said, and using my first name made my chest tighten. "We've had 2 patients admitted to Providence ER since yesterday. Both overdoses, both traced back to prescriptions authorized through your account." He turned his monitor toward me. A 15-year-old named Brandon, admitted with respiratory depression from a fentanyl patch prescription I supposedly wrote. The kid had no chronic pain history. The second, a middle-aged woman, Margaret S., had taken 3 times the therapeutic dose of lithium and was now in the ICU with kidney failure. I tried to explain, words tumbling out about stolen credentials, how I would never prescribe fentanyl to a teenager, how the lithium dosage was absurd. But Dr. Reeves just clicked his pen, expression darkening. He pulled up more records, suspicious prescriptions from the past days, all following a pattern. Dangerously high doses of controlled substances, antipsychotics at toxic levels, mood stabilizers that could cause organ failure. Whoever was doing this understood psychopharmacology, knew which drugs at which doses would maximize harm while appearing plausible to initial safety checks. This wasn't random. It was methodical, calculated, cruel. By 3 p.m., the police arrived. 2 detectives who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Detective Inuan's sharp eyes cataloged everything, while her partner, Hoffman, typed on a chirping tablet. They questioned my routine, who had access to my office, whether I noticed anyone suspicious. Surreal. I felt like a suspect in my own life. They examined my devices, even my router. No intrusion, no breach. My home network was secure. By evening, the hospital had suspended my prescribing privileges pending investigation. The words hit like ice water. Pending investigation. Bureaucratic speak for, you're done until we figure out if you're a criminal or incompetent. I sat in my car, staring at a concrete wall, trying to process how my career had unraveled in hours. Texts from colleagues flooded in, some supportive, some gossiping, some already distancing themselves. Worse, whoever was doing this still had access, likely preparing more prescriptions that night. My paranoia ran wild. The resident obsessed with my prescribing patterns, the janitor working late, a quiet man named Carl who hummed jazz, the new night shift pharmacy tech Ashley. Every interaction replayed in my mind. I triple-checked my apartment locks, closed blinds, even shoved a chair against the door like a thriller movie character. I started documenting every detail, building a timeline of my office activity, unusual encounters, anything suspicious. Around 9 p.m., Bethany called again, voice urgent and hushed. She had cross-referenced the fraudulent prescriptions with pharmacy pickup records. Every prescription had been collected, but by different people, none matching patient names. Signatures were all slightly different, but Bethany noticed a small, almost invisible hook at the end of the last letter. She traced the pattern back months and across other doctors' prescriptions. It hit me. This wasn't personal. I was just one target in a larger, sinister operation. My mind raced to who could access multiple doctors' credentials and pick up prescriptions without raising suspicion. Then it clicked. Secure Health Logistics, the medical courier service we'd switched to months ago. I spent hours digging, discovering a ghost company with fake addresses and stock photo employees. The next morning, Detective Enuan's team pulled surveillance from the pickup times. Multiple couriers, same builds, alternating shifts. They traced it to Dr. Nathan Garrett, a colleague on sudden family emergency leave. He had administrative access, stayed late, and trained new doctors. Perfect cover. By midnight, the scale was clear. Nathan had collected credentials for months, installed keystroke loggers, created fake employees, and built a pipeline to sell controlled substances. DEA tracked him near the Canadian border with 2 accomplices, thousands of dollars worth of medications, credentials from 4 hospitals, plans to expand. The accomplices confessed. Nathan had promised easy money, told them the doses were close enough to real prescriptions to avoid harm, but greed escalated to deadly levels. My privileges were restored within a week. I changed all passwords to randomized strings, enabled every 2-factor authentication, and still obsessively checked prescription logs nightly. Nathan got years in federal prison. Accomplices got 8 each. Secure Health Logistics was just a fake website and uniforms. Sometimes the most terrifying threats aren't strangers in dark alleys. They're colleagues who smile at you in the hallway while systematically destroying lives for profit. I've worked the night shift at Riverside Memorial for years now, and you get used to the strange things that happen after midnight. The hospital has its own rhythm when everyone else is asleep. The hum of fluorescent lights, the squeak of carts rolling down empty halls, the low murmur of monitors echoing from distant rooms. January was always the worst. Cold, long nights, understaffed shifts. That particular year, I was pulling double shifts just to pay for the new baby's room. My wife, Laura, was pregnant with our second, and every extra dollar mattered. I worked as an orderly on the 4th floor, the long-term care ward where most patients stayed for months, even years. The job wasn't glamorous. Changing bedpans, helping nurses move patients, cleaning up whatever needed cleaning. But it was steady work, and the night differential made it worthwhile. That Thursday began like any other. I was pushing my cart through the dimly lit hallway at 11 p.m., checking supplies and making sure the morning crew wouldn't have to scramble. Around 12:15 a.m., I was restocking gauze in the supply closet when I heard it, a soft electronic chime from down the hall. Call bell from room B. Nothing about that would have been unusual except that room B had been empty for months, ever since old Mr. Jameson passed away. The room was slated for renovation, new flooring, fresh paint, but no work had started yet. I assumed maybe someone had been moved there without updating the board. Happened sometimes. As I approached, a shiver ran down my spine. The hallway felt colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones through the thin hospital windows. The door to B was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I flicked on the lights. Empty. Bed frame without a mattress, plastic sheeting on the floor, and that old call button still blinking red. I bent down and disconnected it from the wall, thinking it was an electrical glitch. Ancient hardware, beige plastic, thick coiled cord, something that should have been retired years ago. I went back to my rounds, dismissing the feeling of unease crawling up my neck. About 20 minutes later, I was helping Nurse Diane turn Mrs. Kowalski in room F when the same chime echoed again. Diane froze, her face tight. She knew B was empty. We pretended not to notice, but the tension hung thick in the hallway. Once finished, I returned to B. The button lay exactly where I left it. The red light on the wall was flashing like crazy, though, and the sound was coming not from the panel, but from the nurse's station down the hall, as if someone was pressing a button remotely. I shook my head, trying to rationalize it. Electrical interference, faulty wiring. But then Diane shouted from down the hall. Mr. Thompson in room H was in distress, ragged breathing, alarmed screaming. We rushed to him. By the time Dr. Patel arrived, he was stabilized. Minutes later, Diane's voice cut through the tension. His cardiac event started exactly 4 minutes after the call bell from B. I laughed nervously, dismissing her comment as superstition. Yet when I checked the log at the nurse's station, the record confirmed it. 12:19 a.m. Call from B, 12:23 a.m. Mr. Thompson's monitor alarm. My unease hardened into cold dread. I tried ignoring it for the rest of the shift, but 2:03 a.m., it happened again. This time, I was alone at the station filling out inventory forms. The hall was silent, except for the chime. Room B lit up on the board like a warning beacon. I didn't go in. I watched the clock. 2:07 a.m. Room C. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs had stopped breathing. She'd been stable for weeks. Her daughter had visited the day before, bringing cookies she loved to share with staff. The crash team worked frantically, but it was too late. Natural causes, they said. Yet I knew. Something in that room was signaling death. The next morning I cornered Eddie from maintenance. Eddie had been at Riverside forever and knew the building like the back of his hand. I told him about the call bell, keeping the deaths out of the story. We spent an hour in B. He tested the wiring, traced the lines, checked voltages. Nothing wrong here, he said, wiping his brow. This button's been disconnected since November when Jameson died. There's no way it could send a signal. But we both knew the system was pointing directly to B. Specific, not random. The older nurses whispered about it. Diane had started her own log. 7 times in the past few weeks, the call bell had gone off during night shifts. Every time, within 4 minutes, a patient experienced a critical emergency. Some of the younger nurses were intrigued, thinking it a medical mystery. The older staff? They avoided the floor after midnight. Even Dr. Patel, the skeptic, suggested keeping B's door closed and covering the call panel. That Saturday night, I arrived for my shift, heart pounding. The door to B was wide open, propped against the stop. The hallway lights formed a yellow rectangle across the floor. The call button lay in the center, cord coiled into a perfect spiral. Footprints in the dust, only mine from earlier in the week. I picked up the button. On the back, tiny numbers scratched into the plastic. A date, November 14th. Riverside Memorial, November 14th, the day the hospital opened. A news article mentioned delayed opening due to technical difficulties with the emergency alert system. 3 patients died that day during the delay. The call bell system had been replaced everywhere, except B, due to budget limits. I dropped to my knees in disbelief, and then the chime rang. Not from the button in my hand, still disconnected, but from the nurse's station. 3:15 a.m., Room G. Mr. Walter Cross, 2 days post-surgery, went into cardiac arrest. We couldn't save him. I stood there holding the call button, watching the chaos unfold. Diane cried. The attending physician was baffled, insisting the surgery had been perfect, but I knew better. By the end of that shift, I made a choice. Transfer to the pediatric ward. Less pay, But I couldn't wait for another night of the call bell predicting death. Yet even years later, Diane's log showed the pattern continued. Minutes after B's call bell rang, someone on that floor entered critical condition every single time. After that shift, I requested the transfer to the pediatric ward. Less pay, yes, but I couldn't bring myself to walk the 4th floor at night again. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the soft chime echoing down the hall, and I knew, minutes later, someone was in trouble. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. Even after moving floors, I kept hearing rumors among the night staff. Diane still logged every instance, and sometimes she'd quietly show me her notebook over coffee in the break room. The pattern never changed. Every time the call bell from B rang, some patient on the 4th floor would face a critical medical emergency. It didn't always end in death, but it was always serious. One night, curiosity, or maybe dread, got the better of me. I walked past the 4th floor on my way to the supply closet. The hallway was silent, lights dimmed, everything seemingly normal. Then, faintly, I heard it, the chime. My stomach dropped. I froze in place. Minutes later, as if on cue, a distant alarm blared from room D. Nurses rushed down, rushing to stabilize a patient who had suddenly gone into respiratory distress. I didn't intervene. I just watched, feeling a mixture of terror and awe. I couldn't bring myself to talk to administration about it. They would either dismiss me or worse, force an investigation that would unearth all sorts of things I didn't want explained. The hospital officially listed it as a non-critical electrical anomaly, but the night staff knew the truth. Room B wasn't just haunted by the memory of Mr. Jameson. It was somehow connected to the emergencies, almost as if it anticipated them. Over time, the staff adapted. We started keeping crash carts closer to rooms when the call bell from B rang. Sometimes we staged ourselves outside the patient rooms that seemed most at risk. It was unnerving, relying on something unexplainable to guide medical decisions, but it worked. Lives were saved, dozens of them. I hated it and hated myself for relying on it, but I also knew we'd never catch up to every emergency if we didn't pay attention to that room. The first time I truly understood the scope of the phenomenon was one Friday night. I was alone at the nurse's station, filling out charts, when it happened again. Room B lit up on the panel. I sighed, expecting another crisis. Minutes later, alarms screamed from room F, an elderly man having a heart attack. I grabbed the crash cart and ran, knowing every step mattered. By the time I arrived, the staff had stabilized him, thanks entirely to the warning we had received from that impossible device. I couldn't stop thinking about it. How could a disconnected call bell, one that had been removed from the system, still function? Was it electrical interference, some glitch that just happened to match human physiology, or something else, something that didn't make sense at all? I refused to open myself to the supernatural explanation, yet every night that room whispered its secrets, its power undeniable. Sometimes I would go into room B before my shift, just to stand there in the eerie quiet. The walls were old, peeling in corners, and the air carried a heaviness I couldn't describe. I'd pick up the call button, examine it, and remember the tiny numbers scratched into the back, the date of Riverside Memorial's delayed opening. The thought of the 3 patients who had died during that initial glitch made my blood run cold. Could it really be the echoes of those events, somehow etched into the circuits, waiting to warn us? It was absurd, and yet there it was. Years passed. Riverside Memorial replaced floors, renovated rooms, rewired circuits, everything except the B panel. The budget had been tight. The board decided to leave it as it was, and so the room remained, a strange sentinel of the 4th floor. New nurses were warned to keep it locked, under maintenance, never to touch the call button. Those who didn't believe the rumors eventually learned the hard way. Staff who ignored the anomaly often found themselves scrambling to save patients moments later. I still worked nights, though I never returned to the 4th floor. Diane and I occasionally compare logs in secret, noting the uncanny precision with which the bell signals emergencies. We've saved lives, yes, but every time I walk past that floor, I feel the weight of what we cannot explain. That room holds a power beyond our understanding, and maybe that's for the best. There were nights when I couldn't sleep after a shift. I would replay the moments over and over. The call bells chime, the panic of staff rushing to save a patient, the feeling of helplessness mixed with relief when someone survived. The fourth floor had become a place where life and death danced along the edges of coincidence and impossibility. I couldn't rationalize it, and I learned not to try. Occasionally, new night staff would ask me why we never go near room B. I always tell them the same thing. It's under maintenance, nothing to worry about. Older nurses, the ones who've been there long enough to see the patterns, just nod knowingly. They don't question it. They never speak of it outside the floor. They respect it, and maybe that's the only way it continues to function. Silence, vigilance, and the willingness to respond when it signals. The call bell still rings sometimes, always disconnected, always precise. Minutes later, someone on the floor faces a crisis, and while the administration officially dismisses it, the night staff has learned to listen, to act, to prepare. It's a silent warning system that defies logic, a strange guardian of life in a place that often feels cold and indifferent. I've made peace with my transfer. I never go near the fourth floor. Yet sometimes, when the night is quiet and the hallway's empty, I think of that little bell, a simple device that shouldn't work, holding a power none of us can explain. Maybe it's a reminder, maybe a warning, maybe it's neither, and we're just lucky enough to notice. Whatever it is, I'll never forget, and I'll never walk that floor again. I'd been supervising the night shift at Westfield General for a few months when everything started going sideways that Monday in November. The hospital stretched across 3 interconnected buildings in downtown Seattle, and after years of nursing and nights spent wandering its corridors, I thought I knew every inch, every shortcut, every supply closet where residents sneaked naps, every echo of footsteps down long, sterile hallways. I had memorized it all. My life at that point was quiet, predictable. Divorced 2 years earlier, living alone in a studio nearby, I preferred the night shift. Fewer distractions, steady rhythm, and the occasional emergency to keep me alert. That night, like most nights, I settled into the supervisor's office around 7 p.m., ready to tackle the mountain of paperwork that seemed to grow while I blinked. It started innocuously, a stack of pale blue transfer forms tucked behind the printer. At first glance, they looked official. Headers reading, Unit W Transfer Authorization, in bold, slightly shimmering ink. What set off the warning bells in my mind wasn't the color or the shimmer, but the destination. Ward W Psychiatric Isolation Unit. Ward W didn't exist. I knew every unit in the hospital by heart. There were only units A through D on the 7th floor. And yet, these forms were signed, authentic signatures from Dr. Morrison and Dr. Yamamoto, 2 senior psychiatrists, whose handwriting I could identify in an instant. My chest tightened as I began reading the details. Patients moved during my shifts, with notes on sensory restriction therapy and reality integration protocols, terms I had never seen in my career. The patient names were familiar, yet disturbingly misplaced. Robert Simmons, transferred for aggressive dissociative episodes. Maria Gonzalez, sent for reality integration therapy. Douglas Park, for intensive cognitive restructuring. Robert Simmons, soft-spoken, admitted for severe anxiety. I remembered him in our standard unit, yet the form said he had been moved days ago. I checked the electronic medical record. Robert Simmons was still active in bed B. I called the unit. The charge nurse paused before responding, then muttered that the bed had been empty for a week. She hesitated, like she was trying to recall a memory she couldn't reach. Maria Gonzalez was the same, active in the system, but her room supposedly empty for a month. By 3 a.m., I abandoned my office. Gripping the blue forms, I began walking the floors, searching for Ward W. The elevators refused to reach the 7th floor. Pressing the button did nothing. Using every stairwell in the hospital, I tried reaching the 7th floor. Each time I was led directly to the 8th or 6th floors, never 7. The windows outside glowed faintly, evidence of a floor that existed visually, but not physically. I found Dr. Yamamoto in the emergency department. Holding the forms up to the light, he ran his thumb over the signature, confirming it was his. He remembered signing vaguely, approving specialized care. But when I pressed him on Ward W's location, he faltered, muttering about pilot programs, temporary overflow units, then stiffly walked away. His eyes, hollow, mechanical, stayed fixed straight ahead. By 5 a.m., families began arriving. Mrs. Simmons showed up clutching homemade cookies, insisting her son had called her, despite no records of such a call. Maria Gonzalez's husband arrived with their children, reporting texts sent an hour ago from a phone still in hospital storage. Panic crept over me as more families arrived, all reporting impossible communication from patients who didn't exist in the system. Nurses began acting strangely. Some insisted they saw patients who weren't there. Others moved mechanically through empty hallways, performing routines for no one. Nurse Blackwood smiled and administered medication to an empty bed, as if nothing was unusual. Desperate, I rifled through old physical archives. In a locked cabinet labeled W Protocol, I found hundreds of the same blue forms, dating back decades. Every form documented a transfer to Ward W, signed by doctors, some long retired or deceased. The oldest was for William Harper, November 12, 1976. Notes claimed successful discharge, but attached clippings reported missing person investigations by the families. When I found my own handwriting on recent forms, signatures I had no memory of, the panic hit. The latest was hours old, for a patient named Oliver Reed, supposedly signed while I ate lunch alone. Security footage confirmed it. I calmly signing documents, my face blank, serene, as if in a trance. The hospital had been using me too, part of its process. I grabbed the blue forms and ran for the parking garage, the wails of families echoing behind me, staff moving like ghosts, and the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. Only when I reached my car did I notice a recurring phrase buried in the diagnoses: reality displacement disorder. Every patient across decades had been marked with the same impossible condition. I drove straight to the police station with the forms in hand, hoping for intervention. But the desk sergeant glanced at them and shrugged. They appeared as blank blue sheets, not a single word written. My evidence was invisible to anyone else. That night, I resigned via email and packed my apartment. Within a week, I relocated to Vermont, working at a small clinic with only 2 floors. Paper charts, no monitors, no impossibly disappearing wards. But the memory haunted me. I checked Westfield General's website months later. Staff photos were missing. Dr. Yamamoto gone since December. Nurse Blackwood removed in early February. Replaced by faces too perfect, smiles too fixed. I still received messages from families, Mrs. Simmons, Mr. Gonzalez, and dozens more. Each story eerily similar. Loved ones gone, paperwork signed by their relatives, discharges that never happened. The annual pattern began creeping in. Every November, a text from an unknown number. Ward W is ready for the next batch. Please report for your shift. I changed my number every year, but it always found me. No one else saw it. The hospital, the families, even the authorities. They denied its existence, but I knew. I had seen the floors that weren't there, the patients who shouldn't exist, my own hand signing forms without permission. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine the patients of Ward W, trapped, documented, existing only on paper while the hospital moves on, its lights humming, hallways empty, but for the echoes of someone else's reality. I know that if I had stayed, I would have become part of it. Another signature, another blank form, another person lost in the system. Even here in the quiet Vermont clinic, I sometimes catch a glimpse of blue forms in my dreams. I wake sweating, heart hammering, the phrase, reality displacement disorder, echoing in my mind. I lock the forms in a safe deposit box, away from anyone else, but the fear is permanent. Because deep down, I know the hospital didn't just disappear. Ward W exists somewhere, waiting, and the system will always need another person to operate it. One wrong step, one unnoticed signature, and it could be me, or someone I love. I've accepted that I will never understand it fully. The mechanics, the reason, the truth behind Ward W, all of it is beyond comprehension. All I can do is survive, stay away, keep moving, and hope that the next November never finds me again. But each year, when the leaves turn and the nights grow long, I can't help but feel the pull of that ward like a whisper behind my shoulder. A reminder, reality is fragile, and some hospitals don't play by the rules. The night shift at Pinewood Behavioral Center was never anyone's first choice. Most of the staff tried to swap it away if they could, but after my divorce, I needed the extra differential pay. Bills stack up fast when you're alone, and night shifts, though brutal, paid better. By then, I had almost 15 years of experience in psychiatric nursing. I'd worked across several psych units in the Midwest, and I thought I'd seen just about everything. Patients who swore their neighbors were poisoning them through the drywall. Others convinced they were secret test subjects in government experiments. A man once told me he could hear colors singing to him, the way a child might hear a lullaby. After a while, you develop a kind of armor. You learn to separate the illness from the person trapped beneath it. You stop jumping at strange stories because that's the job. You hear them every night. But that February, something happened at Pinewood that still makes my chest tighten whenever I think about it. Something that made me question not just my career but my sanity. Something that followed me even after I left. I was the charge nurse on Unit B, the acute stabilization ward. We had maybe 20 patients that week. Nothing unusual for the season. Winter always hits people harder. The isolation, the endless gray skies, the lack of sunlight. It creeps in on them until all you can do is try to keep them afloat. The first incident happened on a Monday night. I remember it clearly because I had just finished doing medication counts with Bryce, our pharmacy tech. Bryce had this habit of bringing in those cheap gas station energy drinks that smelled like liquefied candy. You could smell the artificial sugar from across the nurses' station. It was about 3 a.m., the deadest hour of the night, when the call light for room 12 started going off. Not the usual steady beep, but the frantic, rapid pressing that means someone is in real distress. The patient was Mrs. Hutchinson, a 68-year-old woman admitted for severe depression after her husband's sudden death. When I entered her room, she was bolt upright in bed, her thin gown plastered to her skin with sweat. Her hands shook violently as she pointed to the far corner of the room. Her voice was shrill, cracking. "You were just there, just standing and watching me." I blinked at her, confused. "Mrs. Hutchinson, I've only just walked in. What did you see?" "You," she whispered, her eyes wide. "You were standing right there. Same scrubs, same hair, same face. I asked what you wanted, but you didn't answer. You just stared, blank, like you weren't really you." My stomach dropped. Because here's the thing. At 3 a.m., I wasn't anywhere near her room. I was in the medication room with Bryce, counting bottles, double-checking dosages. We had the computer logs and the security badge records to prove it. I tried to calm her, gave her some Ativan per her orders, and chalked it up to grief and exhaustion. Nightmares can crawl out of the dark and feel terrifyingly real, especially for someone so fragile. But Mrs. Hutchinson wasn't vague about what she saw. She described me in detail. My purple scrubs with the faint coffee stain near the right pocket. My hair pulled up in the messy bun I always wore for night shifts. Even my ID badge flipped backward, the way I always turned it so it wouldn't smack patients when I leaned in. Those weren't generic guesses. Those were exact details. Too exact. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, it was Mr. Garrison in room 9, a Gulf War veteran admitted for severe PTSD and paranoia. He was one of those patients who always wedged a chair against his door, convinced someone might try to get in. At precisely 3 a.m., he hammered his call button until the alarm blared through the unit. When we reached his room, we found him crouched in the bathroom, trembling, his face wet with sweat. He refused to come out until I promised the other me was gone. When he finally peeked out, his eyes landed on me and went wide with horror. His voice cracked as he shouted, "That's her! That's the one who was in my room!" The problem. At that very moment, I had been in the break room across the unit video calling my daughter in California. She'd been anxious about her midterms and wanted to talk. I had the call log to prove it, and Tom, one of our techs, had walked past me mid-call. Security footage confirmed I hadn't left the break room, and yet Mr. Garrison swore he had seen me standing at the foot of his bed, expressionless, unmoving. Janet, the charge nurse from Unit A, tried to be rational about it. Maybe another staff member who looked similar to me was playing a prank. But I was 42, prematurely gray, with a jagged scar on my chin from a childhood accident. Nobody on staff even remotely resembled me. By Friday, 3 more patients had reported the same thing. Mrs. Truman, a retired school teacher with severe anxiety, woke up screaming that I was standing by her window. James, a bright-eyed 20-year-old experiencing his first psychotic break, grew so agitated after seeing me that he had to be restrained. And James had always liked me. He trusted me, even looked forward to our daily talks about his dreams of becoming an engineer. Then came Evelyn. Evelyn was different. She was in her late 70s with advanced dementia. She barely spoke, and when she did, her words were usually jumbled nonsense. But at exactly 3 a.m. on Friday night, Evelyn suddenly sat up in bed and cried out with shocking clarity. The nurse with the gray hair, she was here, just staring at me. Why won't she answer? Her aide nearly fainted. Evelyn hadn't spoken a coherent sentence in weeks. By then, administration got involved. They installed new cameras, brought in IT, checked the ventilation system for carbon monoxide leaks. Nothing explained it. The only thing that stood out was the timing. Every single incident had occurred at exactly 3 a.m., and the patients weren't describing a vague presence. They were describing me, word for word, detail for detail, down to the smallest habits I barely noticed myself. That Saturday night, I made sure I was at the nurses' station at 3 a.m., with 3 other staff members and even Dr. Phelps, the attending psychiatrist. We watched the clock together, tense and silent. At 3 sharp, nothing happened. We all laughed nervously, relieved. But then, 30 seconds later, the frantic call light started beeping from room 14. When we rushed in, Mr. Carver, a middle-aged accountant admitted for severe bipolar disorder, was pressed against his headboard, shaking. His finger pointed to the shadow near his closet. His lips trembled as he stammered. She was here, standing there. But this time, she wasn't just staring. I swallowed. What do you mean? His eyes locked onto mine. She was mouthing something, over and over. No sound, just lips moving. The same words again and again. What words? I asked. He gripped my arm so tightly it left bruises. His breath was hot and ragged. You were saying, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." The room spun, because at that very moment, I had been sitting at the nurse's station, under direct observation, and yet Mr. Carver had scratches on his arms, raw and bleeding. He claimed he'd clawed himself just to prove he wasn't asleep. That was the first time I truly felt fear settle deep inside me, because this wasn't just about hallucinations anymore. This was something else, something wearing my face, something practicing. By Sunday night, my nerves were so frayed I almost called in sick. Every shift that week had spiraled deeper into something unexplainable. My co-workers looked at me differently now. Not with blame exactly, but with unease, as if I'd become part of the very problem we were supposed to manage. Even my daughter noticed during our calls. "Mom, you sound different," she'd said one night. "Distracted. Like you're not really here." The truth was I didn't feel like myself anymore. The strange reports, the impossible sightings, the bruises Mr. Carver left on my arm, they had all begun to chip away at my sense of reality. So on my last night before a scheduled 3-day break, I made a decision. If this thing, whatever it was going to show up again, I wanted proof. At 2:45 a.m., I asked Tom, one of our night techs, to help me. We locked ourselves inside the medication room. Just one door, no windows. A confined box where nobody could sneak in. Tom sat opposite me, holding up his phone with the camera recording, the glowing clock on the wall in clear view. "From now until 3:15, I told him. "No interruptions. We just sit here. If anything happens, we'll have it on record." Tom nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. We sat in silence, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the room. My pulse thudded in my ears as the clock ticked closer to the hour. At 2:59, the floor outside creaked with slow, deliberate footsteps. Tom's eyes darted to the door, then back to me. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my throat dry. The squeak of nursing shoes dragged across the polished linoleum, inching toward us. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. No knock, no movement, just silence pressing against the doorframe like a held breath. Then the call lights erupted. 2 rooms at once, rooms 11 and 15, both alarms blaring in panicked succession. Tom looked at me, panic creeping into his voice. "They're seeing you again." I shook my head. "Impossible. You're recording. I haven't moved." When the commotion finally settled, we checked Tom's video. At first, relief surged through me. It showed me sitting perfectly still, pale but solid in that chair. But then, Tom dropped the phone. Because at the 3-minute mark, while I was visible in the chair, my reflection in the glass door behind me disappeared. The chair was reflected. Tom's arm was reflected. The room itself was reflected, but not me. For 15 full seconds, there was nothing where I should have been, just a hollow emptiness in the glass. Tom transferred to day shift the very next week. He refused to talk about it again. When I returned from my 3 days off, things had escalated. Kendra, the aide who worked with dementia patients, pulled me aside. She held a crumpled piece of paper Evelyn had scribbled on. Evelyn, who barely strung words together anymore, had somehow written a clear sentence in shaky, scrawling handwriting. "The nurse isn't visiting. She's practicing." The words made my skin crawl. Practicing for what? Administration didn't have answers. They were polite but firm. I should take a leave of absence. They framed it as compassion, time to rest, to decompress. But I could see the unease in their eyes. The patients weren't the only ones haunted anymore. I agreed to the leave, packed up my locker, handed in my badge. But before I left, I couldn't stop myself from walking down Unit B one last time. Past the rooms, past the cameras, past the empty nurses' station. The air felt heavier there, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. And I swear on everything I have, that in the reflection of one darkened window, I saw her, me, standing just behind my shoulder, expression blank, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly, repeating something I couldn't hear. I left Pinewood that night and never went back. The official report concluded it was a case of mass psychogenic illness, a fancy way of saying one patient's vivid hallucination spread to the others by suggestion. But that didn't explain the timing, or the details, or the video of my missing reflection. Months later, I ran into Bryce at the grocery store. He looked older, worn out. He told me the incident stopped the day I left, just ceased entirely. But then his face darkened. They hired a travel nurse to cover your shifts. Gray-haired woman, older, named Susan. 2 weeks in, she had a cardiac episode right there at the nurse's station. Survived, thank God. But when she woke up, she kept insisting someone had been standing behind her. I swallowed hard. Who? Bryce's voice dropped to a whisper. She said it looked exactly like her, only emptier, like a photocopy of a photocopy. Susan quit nursing after that. I work in a pediatric clinic now. Day shifts only. No locked wards, no graveyard hours. But sometimes, always at 3 a.m., I wake up for no reason, and I lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, afraid to look toward the mirror on my dresser, because I know deep down she's still practicing, and one night she might not stop at practicing anymore. I used to think silence was comforting. After years of city noise, sirens, neighbors shouting through paper-thin walls, buses groaning outside my apartment window, I thought I'd finally enjoy a little peace. That was the whole reason I agreed to house-sit for a friend of mine, Sam, who owned a quiet place on the edge of town. He'd called me a week earlier, saying he'd be gone for work and didn't want the house empty. "It'll be easy," he promised. "Water the plants, bring in the mail. That's it." I didn't hesitate. I was burned out, exhausted from school deadlines and my part-time job. I wanted space, stillness, somewhere I could breathe. Sam's house seemed perfect. 2 stories, a backyard lined with trees, the kind of home you imagine in magazines about suburban tranquility. The first day was fine, uneventful. I unpacked a small bag, explored the kitchen stocked with snacks, and collapsed on the couch. By late afternoon, golden light poured through the windows, stretching shadows across the living room. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my body unclench. But silence changes when the sun goes down. By nightfall, every creak of the house felt amplified. The old pipes groaned as though someone was shifting deep inside the walls. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. The clock in the hallway ticked with a sharpness that made me grit my teeth. And then, there was the sound upstairs, soft, almost deliberate, like a footstep pressed carefully against wooden floorboards. At first I told myself it was nothing. Houses settle, right? That's what everyone says. But it didn't feel random. It felt measured. A slow step, then silence. Another step, then stillness, as though someone were pausing to listen. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring into the darkened second floor, telling myself to grow up. There was no one here. Sam had locked the doors before leaving, and I double-checked every window when I arrived. Still, I couldn't shake it. I climbed the stairs with a heavy flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the hall. The doors to the bedrooms were shut, and when I opened them, one by one, I found nothing unusual. Neatly made beds, folded clothes, the faint scent of Sam's cologne clinging to the air. The house was empty, or so I thought. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, ears straining for any sound. The footsteps returned around 2 a.m., faint but deliberate, directly above me. I clenched the blanket tighter around my shoulders, heart hammering so hard it drowned out the rhythm of the steps. I thought about calling Sam. I thought about calling anyone. But what would I say? "Hey, I think your house has footsteps?" It sounded ridiculous. So I did nothing. I lay there, frozen, until the sounds eventually stopped. By morning, sunlight made me feel foolish. Fear always seems smaller in the daylight. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, just exhaustion playing tricks on me. I busied myself with chores, watered the plants, checked the mail, and tried not to think about the night before. But then I noticed something I couldn't explain. The attic hatch in the hallway ceiling, one I hadn't touched, was slightly ajar, just enough to leave a thin line of darkness peeking out. I stared at it for a long time, my skin crawling. I tried to rationalize. Maybe Sam had left it open before he left. Maybe the air pressure shifted it. Maybe I hadn't noticed it yesterday. But deep down, I knew. That night, the footsteps returned. Louder this time. Heavier. They didn't pace aimlessly. They moved with purpose, from one end of the attic to the other, back and forth, as though whoever was up there was waiting. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay in the dark, listening, every nerve in my body tight as wire. By the third night, I'd had enough. Armed with the flashlight again, I dragged a chair beneath the attic hatch. The air above seemed unnaturally still, as though the house itself were holding its breath. My fingers trembled as I reached up and pushed the hatch open. The smell hit me first. Stale air, dust, and something faintly sour, like old sweat. I pointed the flashlight into the crawl space, heart rattling in my chest. At first I saw nothing but insulation, wooden beams, and shadows. Then, as the light swept across the far corner, I froze. A blanket, a water bottle, crumpled food wrappers. Someone had been living up there. The beam flickered across something else. Papers pinned to the wooden beams, drawings, sloppy sketches of people. My stomach lurched when I realized they weren't just anyone. They were of me. Dozens of sketches, all from different angles. Some captured me cooking in the kitchen. Some showed me reading on the couch. Others were of me asleep. My hands went numb. The flashlight wobbled, and for a moment I nearly dropped it. I clambered down the chair, slammed the hatch shut, and shoved the chair aside. I didn't breathe again until I locked myself in the guest room. I wanted to run. I should have run, but some paralyzing thought held me there. If I left, what if I ran straight into whoever had been living above me? What if they were already watching, waiting for me to open the door? So I stayed. All night, I stayed. The footsteps never came that time, but that didn't comfort me. Not at all. Because silence, I realized, was worse. Silence meant whoever was up there had changed their routine. Silence meant they were planning something new. The crawl space seemed darker the next morning, as if the shadows had thickened overnight. I told myself I was imagining it, that fatigue and fear had rewired my brain. But the truth was gnawing at me. Someone had been inside my home. Someone had been living right above me. I couldn't bring myself to step under the attic hatch in the hallway. Every time I walked beneath it, my skin prickled as if unseen fingers trailed across my shoulders. The thought of pulling that cord and seeing a face leaning down was enough to send me sprinting back to my room. For a few days, I tried pretending life was normal. I did my homework in the kitchen, blasted music through earbuds, and convinced myself I was being dramatic. But the signs piled up. A juice carton half empty when I hadn't touched it. My phone charger missing and then reappearing in the wrong outlet. A fork left in the sink with residue on it that wasn't from anything I'd eaten. I tried to reason it out. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe stress made me sloppy. But late at night, when I lay still in my bed, I could hear it again. The faintest creak above. The kind of noise wood makes when weight shifts slowly, carefully. It was never constant. Whoever, or whatever, was up there knew how to move with patience. They only shifted when the rest of the house was silent, when my parents' snores rumbled through the walls, when the clock ticked steadily in the hallway. One night, I decided I had to know. I lay awake, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Hours ticked by. My body begged for sleep, but I refused. Sometime around 2 a.m., it happened. The faint, deliberate scuff of a foot above me. My breath hitched. I slid out of bed, heart hammering so loud I thought it might give me away. Slowly I crept into the hallway. The attic hatch was only a few steps away. The string dangled innocently, swaying slightly in the draft. I stood beneath it, barely able to breathe, listening. Silence. For a second, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it again. Then, right above me came the unmistakable sound of a cough. Not a creak, not the settling of old wood. A cough. I staggered backward, my hands shaking uncontrollably. There was no denying it anymore. Someone was up there. The next morning, I tried to tell my parents again. They brushed it off with the same tired reassurances. Old houses make noises. You need to sleep more. Don't scare yourself. I wanted to scream at them, drag them into the hallway, and force them to stand under that hatch until they heard what I heard. But I didn't. Their denial was almost worse than the presence above us. So I made a decision. If they wouldn't believe me, I would get proof. That night, I borrowed my dad's camcorder from the closet and set it on my desk, angled toward the attic hatch. I left it recording all night, my stomach twisted in knots. The next morning, I hit play. Hours of nothing sped past in silence, shadows stretching across my room, the red glow of my alarm clock shifting with time. And then, around 3:17 a.m., movement. The cord dangling from the hatch swayed. Once, twice. Then the hatch creaked downward, just a crack, not fully open. 2 pale fingers curled around the edge of the door. I froze, watching the screen as those fingers lingered for a few seconds before sliding back up. The hatch closed again, as quietly as it had moved. I couldn't watch anymore. My stomach lurched, and I nearly threw the camcorder across the room. Someone was up there, watching, waiting, moving only when we slept. I didn't tell my parents this time. Instead, I decided to check myself. I don't know what drove me. Terror, curiosity, anger at being stalked in my own home. But the thought of doing nothing was worse. That night, when the house was silent, I took a flashlight and stood under the hatch. My hands shook as I pulled the cord. The ladder creaked down slowly, the wood groaning in protest. A stale, suffocating smell drifted out. Sweat, mold, something sour. I gagged, but forced myself upward. The beam of my flashlight sliced through the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but insulation and dust, cobwebs hanging in thick ropes. Then I spotted it. A small pile of blankets shoved into the corner, wrappers from snack bars, empty water bottles, and on the floor in the dust, dozens of footprints, bare, human footprints. My heart stopped when the beam caught something else, a Polaroid photo pinned to the wooden beam. My bedroom, taken from above through the slats of the vent. I stumbled back, the ladder shaking under me. That's when I heard it. The shuffle of movement, not behind me, but deeper in the crawl space. Someone was still here. I bolted, practically throwing myself down the ladder. The hatch slammed shut above me with a heavy thud. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran straight into my parents' room, screaming, sobbing, barely able to form words. This time, they listened. The police came. They pulled the hatch open, shining their own lights inside. They found the blankets, the trash, the evidence of someone living there, but no one was inside. The crawl space led to a narrow ventilation shaft, and from there, outside, whoever it was had slipped away. The officers told us it wasn't uncommon. Squatters hiding in attics or crawl spaces, slipping in when families left doors unlocked. They tried to make it sound routine, as if that explanation made it better. But I knew better, because when they searched, they missed something. Later, when the house was quiet again, I checked the corner myself. I found another Polaroid tucked under the blankets. It was of me, asleep in my bed, and scrawled across the bottom in smudged ink were 3 words, "Still watching you." I'd been working security at Millbrook Psychiatric for about 6 months when the nights started to get weird. The job had been perfect for me at the time. Graveyard shifts, minimal interaction with people, just me and the monitors in the basement control room. Freshly divorced, I needed something steady while I figured out what came next in life. The facility itself was one of those old state hospitals, a hulking brick building from the 1920s that had been modernized but still carried that oppressive institutional weight. Its narrow windows, long shadowed hallways, and lingering smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with something medicinal were almost comforting in a strange way. Until that Wednesday in December, I was doing my usual sweep through the camera feeds, checking the main entrance, residential wings, therapy rooms, cafeteria. The therapy wing was always dark at night, emergency lights casting long shadows down the corridor. As I switched to camera 8 covering the old group therapy room, I heard it, clear as day through my headset. A man's voice, calm and measured, asking someone about their childhood. Then a soft, trembling response. Female, talking about her mother's drinking problem. I froze. The room on the screen was empty, just overturned chairs and faded green carpet. At first I assumed it was interference. Maybe a forgotten radio, someone's phone picking up a podcast. I checked the audio panel across all cameras. Nothing, except camera 8, where the little green bars jumped with each word. The therapist's voice rasped like someone who'd smoked for decades, and the patient's sobs were disturbingly real. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she said. "The voices, they told me to." My blood ran cold. I Googled Dr. Harrison, the therapist she mentioned, retired years ago, and Gloria, the patient. A news article from years past mentioned her, confirming the details I was hearing. I radioed Jerome, the other guard. "You hearing anything weird?" "Only my stomach growling," he laughed. Jerome was weeks from retirement and could not have cared less. I didn't push it. I noted it in the log as a possible audio malfunction and tried to move on. But the session continued for another 10 minutes. Every shuffle, every pen click, every pause sounded impossibly real. The next 3 nights were quiet. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I dozed off, having one of those vivid, lifelike dreams. But Saturday morning, it happened again. This time it was camera 4, the individual therapy room on the 2nd floor. The voice of a younger therapist talking to a teenage boy filled my headset. The boy described an incident with his stepfather, how he had hit him with a baseball bat, how blood had splattered on the kitchen curtains. My stomach churned. The therapist's voice remained calm, urging the boy to breathe, to slow down, while the child raged. I grabbed a notebook, started documenting everything. Patient Kevin, therapist Dr. Melissa Reeves. I looked her up. She'd left Millbrook years ago. The session I was hearing had occurred long ago, but every word, every pause, every sound was as clear as if it were happening live. By the 3rd week, I was hearing sessions nearly every night. Different cameras, different therapists. Patients from years ago, some deceased. I had half a notebook filled with names, dates, and incidents. There was no chronological order, no apparent link between patients or therapy sessions. The only common thread, all these sessions had taken place in rooms monitored by the cameras I watched. And then, that Friday night, December 10th, I made the mistake that changed everything. I'd just finished my first round of rounds, checking doors, emergency exits, securing the medication room. I poured coffee, sat back in my chair, and started the camera rotation. Camera 3, small therapy office near the admission desk. I froze. My own voice came through the headset, clear, unmistakable. I was talking to a therapist about things I'd never spoken of in my life. The car accident, watching Melanie die while I struggled with the seatbelt, months of insomnia afterward. Details so specific, so intimate, I felt my chest tighten. My ex-wife, Melanie, was very much alive, asleep across town with her new boyfriend, and yet, there I was, broken, desperate, confessing things I had no memory of. Dr. Anderson's voice was calm and clinical, asking about past trauma, my father, my fears. The other me described finding my father hanging in the garage, but he was alive, in Arizona, sending fishing photos every other week. I couldn't breathe. I called Melanie, awake, irritated, alive. I called my father, voicemail, alive. But the recording persisted. My voice, memories that weren't mine, a life I didn't live. The next morning, I went straight to HR. Cheryl, the HR manager, pulled up my employee file. My heart stopped. There it was, a 3-day involuntary patient hold at Millbrook, records detailing a psychotic episode, severe dissociation, and complete amnesia for traumatic events. The forms, medication logs, discharge paperwork, all with my signature. I had no memory of it. My reality didn't match the documentation. I left with a printed stack, reading in the parking lot under the surreal morning sun. Pills prescribed by Dr. Anderson, progress notes from months of therapy, journals describing voices, tragedies, echoes of timelines that hadn't existed. The last entry was dated a week before I'd applied for the Millbrook security job. I called in sick for the next 3 nights, trying to verify which memories were real. Bank records, co-workers' accounts, receipts. There was a gap in transactions matching the hospitalization dates, payments to a pharmacy for medications I didn't remember taking. The bottles sat unopened in my cabinet. I stared at them, couldn't remember buying them, couldn't remember taking them. Then I found a journal hidden in my closet behind old tax returns. My handwriting covered pages upon pages, describing voices through TVs, radios, phones, all speaking of events that hadn't happened or had happened differently. The last entry, written a week before starting at Millbrook, detailed everything I'd just uncovered. The patients, the therapists, the sessions, my own voice on the monitors. I went back to work after 3 days, needing answers. The first night back was quiet. No voices, nothing unusual. Maybe discovering the truth had broken whatever spell this place held. But around 2 a.m., camera 6, East Wing therapy room, I heard myself again, talking to Dr. Anderson about the sessions I'd experienced, about discovering the hospitalization records, about finding the journal. My other self laughed and said he had resumed the medication, that the voices had stopped. The session was dated December 3rd, days from now. I quit that night, packed up my thermos, left my badge on the desk, walked out. On the way home, I stopped at a 24-hour diner and tossed the printed records in their dumpster. Back at my apartment, I flushed the pills and threw the journal away. Found a new job stocking shelves at a grocery store. No monitors, no recordings, just boxes and silence. Months passed. I tried not to think about Millbrook, about the voices, about the other me. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I'd made the right choice, if ignoring it meant losing a chance to understand the truth, or if continuing the medication would have silenced whatever was still listening. Then last week, I found another journal, newer than the first, hidden in a shoebox in my closet. The first entry, dated December 3rd in my handwriting, described my first day back at Millbrook, after supposedly taking medical leave. According to this journal, I never quit. According to this journal, I'm still working there. I don't know which reality is mine anymore. And every time I sit down, trying to organize my life, I swear I can hear faint whispers from the past, faint echoes of myself talking to voices that never existed, yet somehow persist.